When reviewing Zenthex.net, the first impression is unmistakably technological. The language is saturated with references to artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data, and autonomous trading systems. It reads like a modern fintech presentation designed to inspire confidence in automation and innovation. The platform positions itself as a forward-thinking algorithmic trading solution accessible to anyone with a relatively small starting deposit. On the surface, it appears streamlined, contemporary, and technologically ambitious. However, in financial markets, technology is never the primary safeguard. Regulation is. If a financial platform holds a legitimate license, that authorization can typically be verified within seconds in an official regulatory register. In the case of Zenthex.net, no license number is displayed, no supervising authority is clearly identified, and no direct regulatory reference is provided on the website. That absence becomes the central starting point for any serious evaluation. The domain Zenthex.net was registered on the 12th of January 2026 and updated the following day. The registration term appears to follow a standard one-year cycle, and the registrar listed is Namecheap. Cloudflare infrastructure is used for hosting and name servers. While Cloudflare is widely used and not inherently problematic, domain recency combined with limited corporate disclosure raises legitimate transparency questions. A newly registered domain does not automatically indicate misconduct. Many legitimate businesses begin with new domains. However, in financial services, digital longevity often correlates with operational track record and reputational history. Trust in markets compounds over time. Zenthex appears to be recently established, and no long-standing digital footprint is readily visible. A critical part of due diligence involves checking regulatory registers, official supervisory databases including those of the Financial Conduct Authority in the United Kingdom, the Cyprus Securities and Exchange Commission in the European Union, the Dubai Financial Services Authority, the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission were reviewed. At the time of analysis, no clearly verifiable regulatory entry matching Zenthex or Zenthex.net was identified in major public registers. This does not automatically imply fraudulent activity. However, it does mean that verifiable top-tier regulatory authorization is not publicly evident. When a broker is properly authorized, it typically emphasizes that status because regulatory supervision enhances credibility and investor confidence. The absence of publicly verifiable authorization shifts the responsibility of confirmation entirely onto the investor. It is important to distinguish between marketing language and regulatory status. Many platforms use compliance-sounding terminology, privacy policies, risk disclosures, and legal disclaimers. These elements create an appearance of structure, but they do not substitute for supervisory oversight. Regulatory authorization activates concrete protections such as capital adequacy requirements, independent conduct supervision, client money segregation rules, external complaint escalation mechanisms, and in certain jurisdictions, compensation scheme coverage. Without confirmed authorization, these safeguards may not apply. Artificial intelligence can optimize trading strategies, but it cannot replace enforceable regulatory protection. At the time of this review, no confirmed official warning notice from major regulators specifically naming Zenthex.net was identified. That clarification matters. The absence of a warning list entry does not equate to regulatory approval. Authorization must be positively verified in a supervisory register. These are separate regulatory realities. Investors may also consult international alert networks such as IOSCO's database to check for cross-border notices. Currently, no clearly visible confirmation of authorization is present, and no formal prohibition notice is publicly identified in leading Western regulatory databases. This places the platform in a category of unverified status rather than officially sanctioned or officially approved. Zenthex promotes a low minimum deposit threshold of $20. Low entry requirements reduce psychological resistance. The initial commitment feels manageable, almost experimental. Models with minimal entry barriers often follow a recognizable pattern: a small initial deposit, algorithm-driven performance display, encouragement to increase capital allocation, and access to higher return tiers. The structure itself is not illegal. However, the website does not clearly disclose regulatory jurisdiction, supervisory oversight of fund segregation, eligibility for investor compensation schemes, or formal dispute resolution frameworks governed by an external authority. In regulated markets, these elements are not optional details. They are mandatory disclosures. The technological narrative deserves attention. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, and automated systems are increasingly used in financial marketing to signal sophistication. However, sophistication does not equal supervision. The most advanced trading algorithm does not protect an investor if legal recourse is unclear. The question is not whether AI trading systems can function. The question is whether the environment in which they operate is subject to enforceable oversight. Without regulatory verification, structural risk increases because all operational authority remains internal to the platform. External commentary on Zenthex has raised questions about domain recency, license transparency, and structural clarity. Independent reviews alone do not determine whether a company is legitimate or fraudulent. However, when external concerns align with a newly registered domain, no publicly verifiable license, and no clearly disclosed regulator, the cumulative pattern warrants careful consideration. Financial risk assessment does not rely on a single red flag. It relies on the alignment of multiple verification gaps. From a legal perspective, the absence of confirmed authorization carries implications. Without confirmed regulatory supervision, there may be no enforceable client fund protection under statutory segregation requirements, no mandated capital buffers, no regulator-backed dispute resolution process, and no independent audit obligations imposed by a supervisory authority. This shifts the burden of trust entirely onto the internal policies of the platform. In regulated jurisdictions, oversight exists specifically to prevent the concentration of unchecked authority within a single private entity. Viewed individually, certain characteristics of Zenthex are not inherently problematic. A newly registered domain is not illegal. AI-driven marketing is common across the financial technology sector. Low deposit thresholds are widely used to encourage accessibility. However, when these characteristics combine with the absence of publicly verifiable regulatory authorization and limited legal transparency, the structural risk profile becomes elevated. The issue is not a single alarming detail. It is the cumulative absence of independent verification mechanisms. Before allocating capital to any financial platform, investors should verify authorization directly in official regulatory registers. This step requires minutes, not hours. Confirmation through supervisory databases provides clarity that marketing materials cannot. If no authorization is found, investors must decide whether they are comfortable operating in an environment without regulator-backed protection. Due diligence is not optional in financial markets. It is essential. If funds have already been deposited, documentation becomes critical. Investors should preserve transaction confirmations, capture screenshots of account dashboards, save all communication records, and contact their financial institution promptly if card payments were used. Early documentation increases the likelihood of escalation options if needed. Transparent record-keeping is one of the few protective measures available in unverified regulatory environments. Zenthex presents itself as a technologically advanced trading platform. The language is modern, the entry threshold is low, and the concept of automated intelligence is compelling. Yet, in financial markets, credibility is established not by innovation alone, but by supervision. Artificial intelligence may impress. Regulation protects. When regulatory verification is unclear, structural risk rises. Each investor must weigh that reality carefully before committing capital.